Seen some folks in the Texas area. Everybody, I'm in Dallas, Texas. And Noah, where are you calling in from today?
I'm calling in from upstate New York today.
Very nice.
Great. Well, it's wonderful to see so many people joining today. I think we can probably get started, Courtney, right?
Yeah, that sounds good. When did you feel the most ownership of learning as an adult, Noah?
As an adult, I actually think,
or as a student, yeah.
or as a student, yeah, it's actually kind of, I actually think about it as a student when I was in, I think it was seventh grade. When it was seventh grade, we did this career exploration project. And the great thing about it wasn't just exploring the career. You actually had a lot of flexibility in how you sort of presented your interest in that. So when I was in seventh grade, I really wanted to be an architect. And so I created this whole like memoir of me as like an architect with like my backstory and an example of like something I had made and stuff like that. So I think that flexibility was really important for me to sort of take that project on. What about yourself, though?
Yeah, I love this question. I think about actually experience in higher ed. In my undergrad at Syracuse University, I was a magazine major and got to do a lot of writing and thinking through like magazine layout and just really having that ownership over what it could look like and flexibility and what the end product looked like was really important to me and something I always think about. I wrote this story about a wild hog hunter, which is so random, but always sticks with me. Oh,
Awesome.
go
That's some
SU.
examples.
Love that,
Oh, I see.
Rebecca.
Yes, go Orange. I'm actually in
Uh,
Syracuse right now.
yeah, seeing a lot of folks from different places. Very much wish that we could see your faces, but because we can't, we will be using this chat feature throughout. So thank you all for engaging in that.
Awesome. So my name is Noah Doherty. I'm a associate partner here at Education Elements. I normally work out of Washington, D.C. And I'm really excited to share the team's update to the Core Four today.
Hi, everybody. I am Courtney Flanders, calling in from Dallas, Texas. I'm a senior consultant with Education Elements, and prior to coming to EE, I founded Dallas ISD's first personalized learning high school. So I really love this work, both as a former practitioner and as someone who supports our schools and districts across the country with personalized learning now.
Awesome. And Courtney and I are on the same team. So we have both been working on with a bunch of our colleagues on updating the Core Four and our whole approach to personalized learning. And so we're going to really talk about three different things today. We're going to start by talking about the evolution of the Core Four, and so how the Core Four has evolved really over the last almost 10 years. And then really naming some of the pieces that have really informed our thinking around our new Core Four personalized learning. So we'll then introduce that, and we'll talk also about the Core Four Continuum. So let's start with the evolution of the Core Four. And this is something, what's really cool about this is we really went back into like the depths of our Google Drive, really going back as far as we possibly could, because we really wanted to think about how our team's thinking around the Core Four has evolved over the last 10 years. And so the very first time that we as a company started talking about this was back in 2014. Education Elements started off doing a lot of work around blended learning. And very much in 2014, right, this is when we start to see schools and districts begin to have technology devices, some really powerful digital programs. And a lot of our work was how can we very concisely talk about some of the most successful ways to integrate that technology into the classrooms. When we think about blended learning, we're thinking a lot about how are we blending in that technology into the classroom in a really successful way. And so in 2014, we begin talking about the elements of blended learning. And then really, I believe it's the next year, we start using the term the blended learning Core Four. So this is the first time that we're really trying to create a really simple framework that really buckets those most successful practices into four different buckets, four different categories. So we have the blended learning Core Four in 2015. And one of the things that begins to happen in 2015 a little bit later is we start talking not just about blended learning, but we also start to talk about personalized learning. one of the things we recognized is that a lot of the things we were talking about with blended learning and how we're really successfully integrating technology into the classroom was we were doing a lot of that work, but we also wanted to take a more expansive view about it, right? It wasn't just about the integration of technology. It was about how are we making sure that all of these tools that we're using are building student ownership, are helping to make sure the kids get what they need and when they need it.
And then Noah, what happened after 2015?
So in 2015, we get a little more of a professional marketing team. So we start seeing our core four elements in color. And the big change, I think, happens in, I believe, 2017. So this is where the core four elements sort of as these four petals. We come up with that, pardon me, in 2016. We make an update in 2017, but we've really stuck with this framework pretty much for the last 5 years. It's the image we're probably best known for. The Core Four white paper that came out in 2016 originally is our most downloaded piece of collateral as a company. And so this is really, I think when we began thinking of taking a step back and really thinking about how we were going to update this, we were really thinking about how do we really focus thinking about how do we update this framework, right? And make sure that this framework is communicating some of these core ideas. And Courtney, sort of curious, like when you first started, because when you started your started the high school thinking about personalized learning, right? Like, were you focused mostly on blended learning at that time, or were you focused more on like personalized learning, or sort of
Yeah,
where does this one?
we were at the time, we started the process in 2014. And so the core four of personalized learning hadn't come out yet. And at the time, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation had released what they described as their tenets of personalized learning. They've since moved away from those because so much of it was not necessarily as actionable as the core four, but we didn't find education elements, personalized learning, until we were kind of a year in when the Core Four white paper was released, and that really influenced our thinking. And I think that's can often be the case for lots of folks. They come to this work at different parts of their journey. And similar to how our clients experience it, we learn alongside them. So would love to hear kind of a little bit from you, Noah, about how did we then get to where we are today?
Yeah, exactly. So actually, so there are really four different things when we think about the new core for personalizing learning. I'd say there are actually like sort of four major changes. And on the next slide, the first one we actually just named is that we're actually updating the name of it from a noun to a verb. And so this has been an ongoing conversation with a lot of us on the team for probably several years now. And one of the things that's really, really important to us is we want to move from this idea that personalized learning is a thing that you can just sort of accomplish or that you can check off the box, and really think about it as a set of actions, right? And I think what's powerful about this is when you think about it more as an action, it's not something that you necessarily like accomplish and then stop doing. It's more of like, how are you continuing to practice that action, develop that action? How are you sort of building that muscle? And so part of it is we're not moving away from the term personalized learning, but in this framework, because we're really orienting around the practices that teachers can do in the classroom, we wanted to shift the name slightly to really reinforce this idea that it's about ongoing action. It's about practicing and developing and iterating on those actions versus sort of a destination or a place that you get to, and then you're like, great, and then you can stop, or there's nothing more to do from there.
Absolutely. It's that ongoing process, that intentionality behind all of those teacher moves. Let's talk about some of the other big changes.
Yeah. So this is one of the ones that I think we found really, really interesting. When we went all the way sort of back and we really kind of looked at how the Core Four had developed, one of the things that we thought about was this idea for moving from something that is digital to flexible, right? So when we first started talking about this particular component, we really focused on that digital content. And I think that made a lot of sense in 2014, 2015. A lot of the programs that are much more sort of ubiquitous today, right, were really new, right? And so we wanted to really make sure that we were using them well, that we were integrating them into the classroom in the right way, if you will. And so I believe it was in 2017 that we moved from the term integrated digital content to the idea that we wanted to talk about flexible content and tools. And that was really meaning more that the tools and the content that we're using to personalize learning for kids, it doesn't just have to come from the computer, right? Like we can personalize learning based on sort of choice independent reading books. We can do that with, workbooks or manipulatives, or there are lots of different ways that we can personalize learning. So part of this idea we evolved from is moving from digital to flexible. And then another part is naming that the purpose of that, right? The purpose of being really flexible with our content is we want to give kids differentiated paths, pace, and then performance tasks. So we want to give different pathways. We want to make sure the kids can move at the pace that is right for them, and that they're able to demonstrate mastery in a way that is meaningful to them as well.
I love how both of us really, that idea of having that performance task was what stood out to us from our own student experiences. And we see that here. How can flexible content and tools and having some ownership over our performance tasks really stick with students and give them that feeling that they truly are owners of their own learning?
Yeah. So another big change that we've seen over the course of the development of the core four is really around this idea of instruction and data. So we've been talking about either targeted instruction or small group instruction for a long time. We've been talking about the way that we're using data, evolving that, and talking about data-driven decisions. And I think that the two things we would just sort of name here, right, are one is that we recognize that the way that we're providing instruction for kids, right, the idea is that we want to make sure it's targeted to what they need when they need it. And that format can be in a small group. It can be in a whole group, and sometimes it can be in sort of the work that we're giving to them individually. So we wanted to provide a little bit more flexibility in how we're targeting data, or how we're targeting instruction. And then I think the thing that's remained really consistent for us is this idea that data should inform instructional decisions and groupings. But as you'll see in our new core four, I think what we also recognize is that these two things are really kind of inherently linked. And so this sort of evolution is something that's really informed our newest version of the core four.
Yeah, so often we've separated these, and then in practice talked so much with folks and practitioners about how they go hand in hand. And so thinking about that update is one that really helps people see how these two things are deeply connected in a way that we didn't visually represent before.
Yeah, and what's been nice is, like, I think taking that sort of intentional step back, we've been able to really name, like, actually, like when we talk about things in the exact same way, all like together all the time, like that means something. And I think that's given our team a lot of perspective.
Absolutely. What about with when it comes to student reflection? Talk about how this has evolved.
Yeah, so the two things that we think about here is we initially talked about it as a practice, right? Like, here's something you do. And what's interesting is we really moved from this idea of practice to habit, that it's not just like a discrete action you do every now and then. It's something, when we talk about habits, like we're talking about something we really want kids to internalize, right? And that we're sort of doing it sort of without even thinking about it. So I think that's one thing that we noticed about this one. I think the other one is sort of this idea that it's not just we want kids to build their ownership of learning. We want them to reflect, not just so that they're more aware kind of the progress they're making, but because we want them to actually have ownership in their learning. And that movement from like an awareness of progress that we talked about originally to this idea that we're really promoting ownership of learning, that's been I think that idea has really informed how we've continued to update the core four of personalizing learning.
Absolutely. So we would love to hear from all of you. We've been using this chat feature a little bit. Which evolution of the core four means the most to you?
And Courtney, as we are waiting for folks to share that in the chat, which one is most meaningful to you?
I think that the move to integrate targeted instruction and data-driven decisions is one that we've seen so much in the districts that we work with, that I feel really strongly about how we've used the data from what we've seen in classrooms, districts, and schools nationwide to really make that shift. And so I think that's the biggest one for me. What about you, Noah?
I really like I think the shift around student reflection and ownership is something that really speaks to me, especially the purpose of it, right? Moving from that idea that we want kids to reflect just because we want them to be more aware of their own progress, certainly really, really important. But I think the idea that that reflection can build ownership of learning is truly powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. I love when people are using the chat because I'm seeing some friends that are here that we haven't been able to connect with in a while. It's great to see that. It sounds like student reflection as a habit is a big one for folks. And yeah, I really love what Chelsea just shared about being flexible, about what we mean with flexible content and tools, and not just that digital content. Um, and moving beyond this idea of a checklist and really getting into the purpose and the actions behind everything.
Yeah, it looks like we have almost like a nice even split, Courtney, of folks who are really excited about student reflection ownership and about the evolution of flexible content and tools.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so we are going to take some time now to look more deeply at what is our new core four of personalizing learning, and what does it look like in practice as well. As we go through this, we'd love to hear from you about what resonates and also how this looks in your space. So feel free to keep using that chat feature. When we think about the new core four of personalized learning, really, we put student ownership in the center because this is the goal. What separates a personalized learning classroom from another classroom or a classroom that does differentiated instruction is the idea that students, people, they're at the center, and that in its most realized form, students are really taking ownership of the learning experience. They're co-creating what their educational environment looks like in partnership with their teacher. In order to have that kind of environment, we need a really nurturing learning environment. That this is essential to supporting all of this work. We can't personalize learning if we don't know who the people in front of us are and who we are doing this work with. And so much of our beliefs around equity and designing from an equity mindset help play into this. And then lastly, we updated the components to better reflect the shifts that we were seeing in practice, and also some additional needs that we saw in practitioners' work. I want to give folks a moment to just read through this definition. Noah, we've defined personalized learning several different ways over the years, and different organizations have been working to really say, what does it mean to personalize learning? What part of this definition resonates most with you?
I really think it's that purpose, right? I think what we're really naming is, I'm going to change that. I would say two things. Like one, I think calling it an instructional approach is how we've always kind of, well, approached it, to be honest. Like we've always approached it sort of as like a general approach, but because we haven't named that specifically, because we would talk about like it as an approach or a set of tools or practices or classroom models, I think that like that it things got lost in the in translation sometimes there. So I think being really clearly from the beginning, it's an instructional approach, helps us name. It's more than just a practice. It's more than just like a shift in how you're planning. It's really how you are approaching and thinking about learning in the classroom. And then naming that the purpose of that, right, is around building ownership of learning, I think is really, really powerful. And it's one of the things that I think has been most exciting for us, this idea that we are moving from we're saying very clearly, this is more than a set of practices. This is how we help kids build ownership of their learning. And we say that really explicitly from the beginning.
Absolutely. I see Monica's put in the chat here that responsive approach is what resonates with her. Please feel free to add in what resonates most with you from this definition. And for me, it's the responsiveness as well. There are lots of things that teachers can do. And what we've seen sometimes is people get in their mind a kind of a fixed mindset around what personalized learning can look like. When we think about really being responsive, it opens up that door for teachers to really think about, what do my students need in this moment? Sometimes that might be a whole group mini lesson. Sometimes that might be calling everyone together all at once. And sometimes it's some of those more flexible and targeted models of learning. And so really thinking about what is it that my students need and how can I respond to those needs in a way that makes sense for these learners, is what sticks out to me the most here, as well as the part that we put in yellow. Yeah.
Yeah. And Courtney, what I think is also powerful about that is, and I think the point you made on the previous slide about how we're really centering it around the person, right? And I think that responsiveness is not, we're not guided by, we're trying to make it flexible enough so we're not guided by a single model or a single tool or a single like program. We're trying to be guided singularly by our students and sort of what they need.
Yeah, it's not sitting kids in front of adaptive software all day, which is great because none of us want that. So digging a little bit deeper into why did we say that our goal is really student ownership? When we think about who our students are, the world that they live in, and really the skills that they're going to need to be successful in life, we want to build that self-awareness. We want to empower students to advocate both for themselves and for their community, to help them develop some tools of self-management and to inspire them to become lifelong learners. When we think about at the end of all of this, what do we hope for kids? It's definitely academic success, but also those skills that we know are going to carry them through the rest of their lives. And that's why we've shifted this to really put that idea at the center. The other thing that we are thinking deeply about is how we create the environment that supports all of this work. And we know that when we think about nurturing learning environments, we've really built our work off of the CASTLE framework, thinking through both self-awareness, social awareness, and also how to develop those really strong relationships. This is important not just for the students in our space, but also for the educators. We want to make sure that educators feel deeply connected to their work, to their students, and that students know that there is a loving and supportive adult in the classroom who is making decisions based on their needs. Noah, I would love to hear from you about really how did we get to this place where nurturing learning environments are the foundation for personalized learning?
I think if we think about those three pieces from the CASTLE framework, I think strong relationships is probably one of the things that would come up in conversations the most, especially if we were like doing like learning walks with school or district leaders, looking at different classrooms. I think one of the things we were able to name very early on is just how important it is that students know that their teacher like cares about them, they know them as a person, they know their strengths, they know their areas of growth. And just that like that knowledge and that trust between the student and teacher is really, really important so that students know that when they're getting content that might be different than their peer sitting next to them, when their task is different, it's not because the one task is better or worse or harder or easier or what have you. It's actually because the teacher really deeply cares about that student. And I think in recognizing that early on, I think was something that helped us really explore the idea of nurturing learning environments and really thinking about what are the aspects of social emotional learning that are really, really important when we personalize learning. But also curious, Courtney, for you, because you were part of all those conversations, what part of that is really lands with you?
I love what you said around students understanding the why behind it, and that one isn't better or worse than the other, but it's really about how to get the best experience. I think this past year and a half, we've been in this COVID environment for longer than any of us have wanted or initially anticipated. But I think if it's taught us anything, it's that these two things really influence the work that we do. We saw when we moved very quickly to virtual instruction and remote learning that without student ownership, the instructional goals get lost, and that students really need to feel that connection to their work. But what we also learned from that time was how important relationships are, how important it is to feel cared for. And those two things, I think, were always on our mind at Education Elements about pieces that we were folding into our personalizing learning framework, but needed to be explicitly called out. And I really feel like COVID was a great catalyst for that change because it made it so starkly obvious to folks.
I think that piece of like sort of calling it out and making it really sort of clear and obvious, I think that's one of the things that as we've sort of stepped back and really reflect on on our journey with personalized learning, on our ongoing journey with personalized learning, it helped us to really name, like, if something is really important, then we need to call it out and we need to talk about it.
Yeah, absolutely. We're seeing that resonate in the chat, just student ownership, empowerment, caring for one another, this idea that relationships are the foundation of great teaching. So we've taken all of this and really used it to update the Core Four, and we're going to talk about each one of these in more detail. Our new Core Four includes reflection and goal setting, really thinking about building self-awareness that can make goal setting truly meaningful. We don't want goal setting to be a check the box, but part of a larger practice and a habit for students. When we think about targeted instruction, this is where we've really incorporated the data-driven decisions and targeted instruction to make sure that the students can articulate what instruction they're receiving and why. In flexible path and pace, it's really about that design and the intentionality behind the learning experience, making sure that each student can get what they need. And then finally, we've added in this collaboration and creativity, thinking about how do we make sure that personalized learning doesn't become something that students do solo or too often, just in partnership with technology, but that it also has all of those elements that we all care deeply about with collaborating and creativity and the opportunities for students to really build and discuss. And then, as Noah mentioned, we've moved really from a noun to a verb. Our first version had a mix of student and teacher actions, mindsets, and goals. Our new version really focuses on what are those teacher actions and how do teachers get to a place where their environment really is personalizing learning for students. Noah, anything you want to add here?
No, I think just that idea that we're focused on those actions, and just when we talk about the power in shifting our language to one that's focused on actions, I think helps us continue to sort of think about this as something we're growing. It's an ongoing process. It's not a destination that we can like reach and then sort of stop at.
Yeah, we don't just say, look, I did it, but it's something I continue to refine and continue to do. In the past, we've thought about student reflection and ownership was the old version of the Core Four, but now that we know that student ownership is our ultimate goal, we've refined this to say student reflection and goal setting. We think that those are practices that really bridge for students what they're learning, why they're learning it. And while they are two separate things, right? We have activities and practices that help us reflect, and then we have things that help us set goals. They are and they should be deeply interconnected in the classroom. When we reflect on what we know and how we learn, it helps build that self-awareness, and it helps make the goals that we set a really truly meaningful experience.
Courtney, this is one of the ones that I think a lot of teachers jump to me, like this is really important, like the why of this is really compelling. But I think sometimes folks are, because it seems so important, are hesitant to jump to it first. And I'm sort of curious, how have you, when you've talked to educators and leaders about this, how do you help them think about this as actually being a really sort of accessible practice?
Yeah. I think with this, it's those bite-sized action pieces, right? How can I set up small but continual habits of reflection and goal setting? So whether it's giving students a moment at the beginning of the lesson after the learning target is introduced to say, what do you already know about this? And how are you currently feeling about it? And then coming back at the end and saying, how was this lesson? What was challenging for you? What did you learn? Those are very accessible, bite-sized next steps that teachers can take to start building in that practice of self-reflection. Obviously, it can't end there. If students say, hey, I already know everything I need to know about multiplying fractions, then we need to have an environment that allows that student to continue to move forward, or an option for how they go deeper in the content. But this is a practice that, it's really a continuum. We start building it in small ways and it grows.
I love that emphasis on small action.
Yeah. We'd love to hear from you all. What does student reflection and goal setting currently look like for your school or your district, whatever your context is? What are some of those things that you're currently seeing? We'll just pause here and give folks a moment to add to the chat.
And Courtney, one of the things I like about this question is also helps us think about what are some of the actions we're already doing that are helping to personalize learning. I think especially when we talk with educators for the first time, we don't want this to feel like something that's brand new, right? We recognize when we talk about this at like a high level, there are parts of it that sort of immediately land for people. And it immediately lands because it's like, oh, I'm already doing this, right? And so I love this reflection question because it helps us sort of name there are lots of things that either we individually are doing, our schools or our districts are doing that help to promote this.
Absolutely. I see some friends and current clients on this call, and just knowing your districts, you use things like leader in me, you set your wildly important goals, you do a pulse check, an exit ticket, all of those practices really help reinforce this idea and help teachers see small ways that they can start. All right, David, we need to hear more about your learner profile. And Chelsea, I love this, the visuals that you've got set up to make that very obvious for folks to see. Stephanie's talking about student data notebooks and test data and really thinking about how do we get to a more holistic and student-led approach. SMART goals, yeah.
Students
What are
tracking
some
their
things
own
sticking
data
out
is
to you?
great. Yeah, no, I love when students are able to track their own data. I also love this idea that this reflection goal setting is something that can be done with both students and their families that Sean is pointing out.
Definitely. I just actually watched a video of one of the schools we work with in Bibb County, Georgia, having a mock student-led conference and walking their teachers through how do we set up our students to successfully lead this. So lots of great ways that this currently looks. All right, so we're going to move along here and talk really about the shifts to what we think of as targeted instruction. I know Noah and I previewed this a little bit, but really when we think about targeted instruction, again, knowing that student ownership is the goal, at its most actualized, targeted instruction really means that students can articulate what instruction they're receiving and why. They know why they're doing something in the classroom. And they do ideally have some choice over the instruction they receive, whether that's based on their data and their current level of understanding, their passions and the things that they're most interested in exploring, or just their learning preferences and how they want to engage with the content. As you all know, in earlier versions of this, we separated data-driven decisions and targeted instruction, but we know that these two elements, they have to go hand in hand. You can't figure out how to target instruction if you don't have recent and aligned standards-based data. And so really thinking about how this works together to help design a meaningful learning experience was so important to our team. Noah, in thinking, yeah.
No, go for it.
No, you go.
I was going to say, Courtney, I think this shift towards saying that actually the goal that there are lots of practices in this that lead up to students being able to name the instruction that they need and sort of why they're getting it. Can you tell us a little bit more about like why did we move towards this idea that all these actions are leading up to something that the student can articulate versus just sort of a teacher practice?
Yeah. I think it really goes back to what is our vision for students? Why are we doing personalized learning in the first place? And it's not just to improve test scores, although that has been a very important part of our work, but it's really about creating an environment where students want to come to school. They want to be thought partners in the work. We see so much, especially in our youngest learners, that excitement to learn. And then somewhere over the years, sometimes it dips a bit. And so when we think about really what is it that we want for kids, it's to feel like they've got a spot in the classroom and that they know why they're there and that they enjoy that experience. We can't have that if students feel like they come to the class and they sit and they get instruction and they have no say over that, and that instruction is not relevant to them or responsive to their needs. And so I think all of it really comes from that larger vision for what we want to be true for kids. What
Yeah,
about you?
absolutely. The importance of that shift, you mean?
Mm-hmm.
Really similar. And, one of the things that I think is, as we talk about orienting towards uh, student ownership of learning, as we talk about personalized learning as an action versus sort of like a thing that we do, just a thing that we get to, pardon me, I think naming that it doesn't stop with the teacher is such an important sort of way that we can think about progressing this, right? Like
Mhm.
sometimes it would be easy in some previous versions of our work to say, oh, like I like to do some great work where we're pulling some data, we're dividing kids into groups, and then sort of we're like, we're good. We targeted instruction. When really I think this helps to mean that there is this much bigger and much more meaningful goal than just sort of like the tactical action of splitting up students into groups or making sure kids are getting different kinds of work. It's actually more about like how are students the ones who can advocate for this, who can name what they need and why they need it. That's such a powerful goal. And it really helps us to name like we can begin to model that, right? But that is the beginning of a journey towards something much bigger.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's not this checklist action. It's that larger purpose and intentionality.
And also,
All
huge shout out
right.
to David for sharing that resource in the chat today. Really, thank you so much, David.
Yeah. Can't wait to look at that. And thanks, Stephanie. We've got a fabulous marketing team who thinks about how to visualize all of these ideas. So, if you've seen earlier versions of our work, you know that typically we've had to call out for folks that personalized learning is not just about technology. And here we hope that by this addition to the Core Four, people see that. Sometimes a misconception that people have, or a myth, if you've ever read our Mythbusters version on personalized learning on our educational myths blog, is that people think sometimes that personalized learning might mean a student sitting in front of a computer all day going through an adaptive software. And while there is definitely time where we want to incorporate those digital tools, that isn't what we think of as a really personalized environment. And we all know from the last year and a half that that's not fun for anybody. So when we think about collaboration and creativity, it's really encouraging students to work with one another, to share their ideas, to create new solutions and projects, and give one another feedback. And we know that when they do all of that, they get to learn more about themselves as well. We really believe that true personalization happens when students get to show up as their whole selves. That includes their values, their emotions, their perspectives, and how they work with others to solve creative solutions and complex problems that are meaningful both to them and to their school community. Um, we've been in so many classrooms across the country, and as former educators, we all know that those moments where the class is getting loud and students are having those rich discussions and they're doing things, that's when we feel the most joy and excitement. So we're so excited to incorporate this as part of the Core Four. Noah, would love to hear from you. What are some examples of collaboration and creativity in action that we think really help contribute to a personalized learning environment?
One of the things I love about this new component of the Core Four is actually just how it can exist in really small and really big ways, right? Like collaboration can be something as simple as just like a pair and share. It can be as something as simple as giving like sort of written feedback to one another. Like it can be on a post-it note, right? Like you can start with really small things. You can do really big things. You can have big Socratic seminars or things like that. But at the heart of it, whatever format works for you, for your students, age group, what have you, the idea is the more the kids are talking about their ideas, they're talking about solutions, they're talking about one another's ideas, the more that they're going to begin to generate novel ideas, their own new solutions, these new ideas. And that sort of that generation of novel ideas, that's where we see the creativity come in. Right. So the more that you are talking with someone else about your ideas, not only the more that you understand that yourself, right? Because you're being forced to sort of articulate it. You're also generating these new ideas, and that's that creativity. And that creativity is really, I think, one of the pieces that orients towards that student ownership.
I love what you said about big and small ways. This doesn't need to be rewriting every assessment to be performance based. It doesn't need to be rethinking all of your units to be project based. It can happen in lots of different elements. And when you feel like it makes sense to have those bigger shifts, you can absolutely do those. We'd love to hear from all of you. Why does this addition to the Core Four matter to you? What impact can it have on student learning? And we've both kind of shared our perspective there, but knowing that this is one of the newest pieces for us to be rolling out, we really want to hear from you all about how it resonates. Can have a moment of wait time as people are typing in here, but it's been so nice to see this collaboration come through, even in the chat, right? About folks sharing different resources and what's working for them.
Yeah, absolutely. I love, we always see one with Chelsea sharing how this fits with their state's profile of a graduate. And I think, you know, we've done a lot of work sometimes around either a portrait or profile of a graduate. And I mean, one of the things we ground that in is just how important communication is, right? And communication isn't, you know, something we can sort of broadly define that sometimes as just like written communication or express, but like the ability to really express our ideas and listen to others and talk about those ideas and allow and sort of integrate different perspectives is so important.
Yeah, absolutely. And Heidi is really picking up on that too, of why do we often see this in our portrait of a graduate or in, you know, elements of the strategic planning work we do. It's because we feel like this is a skill, and across the country, people feel like this is a skill that really helps students be successful in that global environment. I love what Kristen just shared. We need to step up our 21st century game. Yeah, absolutely. It's 2021, almost 2022. It's time to really think about what those 21st century skills look like in action.
I also love what I think Kristen said about how learning doesn't happen in silos, right? And we very much understand that from this past year, that the most robust and exciting and sort of the curiosity that we can spark with kids is when we have them talking with each other and working with one another and hearing from one another. And that's such an important sort of experience for students and for adults.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, we've talked about this a little bit. Noah, can you walk us through what we're seeing here with the new flexible path and pace?
Yeah, so when we talked about the evolution of the Core Four, we talked about how we started with integrated digital content to flexible content and tools. And what we're beginning to say here is with flexible path and pace. One of the things that we're really excited about saying is that it's actually, we recognize that all different kinds of content and curricula and programs and tools, all those different things can be personalized. And it is less about the content specifically, and it's more about the flexibility of the format, right? So we recognize that these students learn in lots of different ways. If we're really going to personalize that learning experience, we want students to progress towards mastery through flexible learning pathways and at different paces. And those pathways and paces can involve everything from digital programs to parts of textbooks to independent reading books, manipulatives, to group activities through projects. Like there are all these different kinds of content that we can use to personalize this, whether you are using a pretty structured curriculum, whether you have more of like an outline, right? All of those different things can be used to personalize learning for students, and that the importance is in that flexibility, right? When we increase flexibility in the learning experience, we provide those sort of tools. That's what's helping to create more self-direction and more ownership of learning. And Courtney, I'm curious to hear, like, especially this idea of moving from content to the idea that format, that flexibility and format is the key. How does that, tell us more about like your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think it just really goes back to that idea of what personalized learning is and is not, right? It's not just one thing that we can purchase and implement district wide. It's really about that intentionality. And we've seen folks personalize using great digital tools and using a learning management system and thinking about how students can move through that. But we've also seen schools and districts be really scrappy and think about how they can set up binders with differentiated work and tasks at different levels and have students go through and think about the content in that way as well. And so I think opening up the door to think about what that format is and why we're offering choices to students and what they can look like really gives the ownership of the learning experience back to students and teachers for them to say,
Yeah.
this is what's best for us.
And I think actually that the last thing you said, Courtney, there is so important, especially around teachers, right? I think naming that it's that format creates this huge opportunity for teachers to design really fun and engaging and just exciting flexible learning experiences. And it also helps to name that the use of, while there are some really great digital programs out there that we think are wonderful, the use of a digital program in and of itself does not automatically mean that you are personalizing learning, right? And
Absolutely.
moving away from that sort of misconception, I think can actually make the use of those programs much more meaningful, right, and much more personal to what students need. But we want to sort of name that kind of explicitly, that just because you and I, Courtney, are using the same digital program, it doesn't automatically mean that that program is like building our ownership of learning.
Yeah,
It can, right? But
it can.
we need that intentionality from the folks who are designing the learning experience.
I want to keep building on that, but also avoid not giving folks enough wait time. So we'll put this question up and would love for you to share in the chat, which component of the Core Four are you most excited about and why? And as you're thinking through that, Noah, just building on what you just shared, I think a benefit, a strength of our team is that we all are former educators. And so we come from a place of deeply trusting teachers to be able to make the smart decisions for their classroom. And part of that means that we know that, there's nothing that you can buy that replaces the teacher's knowledge of what's best for his or her students. And so, that to me is why rethinking how we talk about flexible path and pace is so important. It's not just one thing.
I love how you called that out, this idea that it actually, in many, many ways, it makes the role of the teacher even so critical, right? It's so critical that the learning environment is really intentionally designed for your students, not for a broad swath of students, right? That a program might be designed for. It's really about it's meaning that the teacher is the key to creating that nurturing learning environment that's able to make all of these components come alive in the classroom.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, looks like people are kind of across the board about what excites them most. Chelsea's got a good question here. How do we get there? How can we build ownership using a digital content tool that's maybe lost some of the excitement? And that's a great question, Chelsea. And I feel like tease us up to talk about our Core Four Continuum. And so, these practices are practices that we continue to develop and to grow. There's nothing that you can do overnight to say, now I'm personalizing learning. It's really about putting all of this theory into practice and explicitly naming what are the teacher and student actions, and allow really a tool really for self-reflection and growth. So, you want to tell us a little bit about how we've updated this continuum, and then we'll show people a bit of what it looks like?
Yeah, absolutely. So then when we came up with the Core Four Continuum, and I might be getting my year wrong, I think it was 2018 or 2019. No, 2018, I believe. 2018 is when we came up with the Core Four Continuum. It was really about putting the theory of the Core Four into practice, right? Like, what are those specific actions that folks can take? And we're sticking with that idea, right? We want to make this as actionable for folks as possible. So we're naming some of the teacher and student actions. It allows for our own as educators sort of self-reflection and growth in these four different areas. Two of the biggest updates. One is we've aligned it to all of our new components, right? So we've been able to update these actions to the new Core Four. We've also tried to make it more simplified. And one of the things we recognize is that sometimes in an effort to make things as sort of universal or helpful for people as possible, we go into a lot of detail. And what we've found that in practice, sometimes that detail can actually be either limiting or confusing. It can kind of backfire in different ways. So what we've tried to do is name just really clear steps that those simplified steps feel very flexible and feel very universal, whether you're teaching kindergarten students, whether you're teaching 11th grade chemistry. And so we actually think that simplification increases its sort of universality.
Yeah. So to these questions about how do we get there, you've got to think about first, where are you? Where are your teachers? Where do they fall in this continuum? Obviously, the support that you're going to offer for folks is going to be personalized based on where teachers are. But then we think about really what are those emerging practices that we can do that lay the foundation to continue to grow. So to your point about I've got this tool and the tool itself is pretty good, but it's lost its oomph. These things don't work in silos. So if you're thinking about that flexible path and pace, how can we build in some moments for reflection and goal setting so students know, why am I using this tool? What am I hoping to achieve through this digital tool today? And how does that connect to my larger goals? If that foundation isn't there at all, start it with the teacher setting some of those goals and the teacher providing opportunities for students to reflect. And as you move forward, we might see some more developing or advancing options, where students begin to set and track those goals. So there is that element of, I'm using this tool because it helps me deepen my understanding of X. And here's where I am, and here's where I want to go. And this is how this tool helps me do that. As opposed to, we're so excited about this big purchase, it's going to make a big difference for students, but the student not knowing why they're using it or the intentionality behind it.
Yeah. Courtney, when I see something like emerging, developing, advancing, sustaining, is the idea that we want folks to be sort of sustaining in all of these? Is this sort of like a rubric, or how do we, when we talk about this with educators, like how do we think about it?
Yeah, we think about really thinking about what makes the most sense for your classroom and knowing that you're going to be in different spaces with different things at different times. So definitely not a rubric, but thinking about how our practices can continue to build upon one another and to grow. And in the sustaining column, really we see this shift from teacher actions to student ownership, because again, that student ownership is the goal. We've gotten a couple questions here in the chat about where can I see this bigger? This is too hard to read on the screen. Noah, where can folks find all of these resources and materials?
Yeah, absolutely. So you've heard Courtney and I sort of had this great conversation about how excited we are, the evolution, the Core Four Continuum. And on our website right now, at elements.com/Core Four Whitepaper, this is where you can download our full white paper, including the continuum at the end. This is live on our website. And so we are super excited to be able to share it with everybody. You can share this with folks outside, share this with your colleagues. You can post it, whatever, however you want to get this out there. But this is now free and open for anyone to download and use here at this website. And David, thank you for dropping that link directly into the chat as well.
Yeah. We also know that you probably want to hear more about different elements of what we've talked about today. Today was really a big overview of lots of different components and the shifts and how we've gotten here. So we invite you as well to consider joining us for some of these expert conversations. We're doing a webinar series that really delves into specific principles that drive personalized learning reimagined. And so you can register for that as well. Coming up soon, we've got that student-centered design, nurturing learning, and then as we get into November, really thinking about being equity focused and data informed. Noah, what do you think people will get out of joining these upcoming webinars?
So each of these four principles, being student-centered design, nurturing learning environments, equity-focused, and being data-informed, these are the four principles that really inform how we support educators and teams of school and district leaders to help sort of move towards a framework that is more personalized. So here we get a little bit more into both like the why of like, why is student-centered design so important when we're actually talking about making this happen in the classroom. So we get a little bit more into sort of how we help support educators and teams of educators and personalized learning for kids. It's supposed to be very conversational, a lot of opportunities for folks to ask questions about this. And so it's in what's also nice about it is you don't need to you can go to the one that makes the most sense for you, that you're most interested in. And it's really meant to be both sort of like a conversation, but really a conversation with the folks who are on that webinar.
We're getting some questions in the chat. What about specific elements of the Core Four? Those will be embedded into these conversations, but also, we do have new video series that's out on our YouTube channel that shows teachers talking about each element of the Core Four and really why those things matter for their classrooms and what it looks like in practice. So we encourage you to check those out as well. We've dropped the link into the chat just to really think about how to register for this series. And we are so grateful for all of your time today. You know, all of this work really has us excited about the future of education and what it means for students. In the event that you have other questions, you want to talk more about anything that you've heard, or you want to just connect with Noah and I further, we strongly encourage you, don't hesitate to reach out. Our emails are here, and we would love to keep the conversation going.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's just been so wonderful to have so many people here. I hope you are just as excited about these updates as we are. And Courtney, it's been great having this conversation with you today.
I know, I've missed you, Noah. It's good to see you. Tell the folks in Syracuse I say hello, and looking forward to continuing these conversations in the future.
Same as well, all of our friends in Texas as well.
Okay, yeah. Bye, everyone. Have a wonderful day.